The situation is no longer just escalating, it's transforming. What we are witnessing right now is not simply a breakdown in negotiations between the United States and Iran. It is the beginning of a shift that could reshape global stability. In recent developments, diplomatic talks have effectively collapsed. Iran has rejected key demands from the United States and is refusing to re-engage in negotiations. This is a critical moment, because diplomacy, even when fragile, acts as a buffer. It slows escalation. It creates space for de-escalation. But once that buffer disappears, the situation becomes far more unpredictable and far more dangerous. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the bigger picture. This is not just about two countries. This is about influence, control, and global economic stability. The United States is attempting to increase pressure, both politically and strategically. Iran, on the other hand, is signaling resistance, not just through words, but through actions. And when both sides refuse to step back, the risk of escalation increases dramatically. But here is what many people are missing. This conflict is no longer just military or political. It is deeply economic. And that is where the real global impact begins. One of the most critical elements in this entire situation is oil. Iran sits in one of the most strategically important regions in the world when it comes to energy. Any instability in this area immediately affects global supply chains. But more importantly, it affects the flow of oil. And to understand how serious that is, we need to talk about one specific location, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage connects the Persian Gulf to the global market, and a significant portion of the world's oil passes through it every single day. If this route is disrupted, even partially, the consequences would be immediate. Oil prices would surge, markets would react, and global economies would feel the pressure. Because oil is not just fuel, it is the foundation of modern economies. Transport depends on it, industries depend on it, food production depends on it. When oil prices rise, everything becomes more expensive. And that is how inflation spreads. Not slowly, but rapidly. Now, add another layer to this situation. Recent strikes have targeted industrial infrastructure, including facilities linked to aluminum production. At first glance, this may seem secondary, but it is not. Aluminum is one of the most widely used materials in the world. It is essential for construction, for transportation, for electronics, for manufacturing. If production is disrupted, supply decreases. And when supply decreases, prices rise. This creates a chain reaction. Higher production costs, more expensive goods. And once again, those costs are passed on globally. This is why the current situation is so complex. Because even if the conflict remains geographically limited, its consequences will not be. Energy markets react globally. Supply chains are interconnected, and financial systems respond instantly, which means even countries far removed from the conflict will feel its impact. Higher fuel prices, more expensive materials, rising inflation, and increased economic uncertainty. And this is where the real risk lies, not just in the conflict itself, but in its ripple effects. Because once inflation starts to rise globally, it becomes much harder to control. Central banks react, interest rates increase, growth slows down, and economic pressure builds. All of this from a conflict that, on the surface, may seem distant, and yet, it is anything but distant. As long as negotiations remain frozen and tensions continue to rise, the probability of further escalation increases, and with every escalation, the margin for error becomes smaller. Because in situations like this, it does not take a full-scale war to create global consequences. It only takes disruption, uncertainty, and instability. So the real question is no longer whether this conflict will continue, but how far its impact will reach. Because in the end, this is not just about politics. It is not just about territory. It is not even just about power. It is about consequences.